Nothing to see here. One of the tenets that Islam copied from Judaism was an abhorrence of images. In 722, Caliph Yazid ordered the destruction of all Christian icons in Syria. Surprisingly, 4 years later, a Christian emperor did exactly the same thing on his home turf. In 726, Emperor Leo III sent soldiers to destroy the huge golden statue of Jesus that stood at the gateway of his palace. He then sent orders to his bishops that all icons should be destroyed, and soldiers were sent out into the city to carry out his commands. There was a riot. Devout women attacked the soldiers. Mobs filled the streets. The patriarch denounced the emperor. The church was split between the iconoclasts, those who destroyed images, and the iconodules, whatever, who served images. For many people, the icons were a way in which they could glimpse some of the glory of heaven. For people who couldn't read, these pictures were immensely important and had a mysterious power. So this dispute was a class struggle. The elite, those who could read and make fancy speeches, were discarding one of the key means of worship for the poorer, illiterate masses. No wonder the poor revolted. There was nothing for them to look at. Support for their position came from the theologian John of Damascus, circa 655 to 750, who argued that the icon was merely an aid to worship. And he pointed out that Jesus was a kind of icon of God. John said things like, "The image is one thing, the person represented another," and "Icons are not idols, but symbols," not forgetting, "You can't touch me because I'm in Syria." He probably didn't say the latter, but it was true. Leo called for John's arrest, but John was in Damascus, which had been captured by the Arabs. Ironically, the pro-icon John was protected by the very anti-icon Caliph. Leo, as you'd expect from any good emperor, called a council in 730, which pushed through a ban on icons and sacked the Patriarch of Constantinople. In Rome, meanwhile, the Pope excommunicated the iconoclasts. Leo responded by seizing control of churches in Byzantine-controlled territory in southern Italy and attempting to have the Pope assassinated. That, my friends, is seriously robust theology. The argument was to rumble on inside Byzantium for centuries. In 780, Empress Irene restored icons to the churches and called her own council in Nicaea in 787 to discuss and debate and then decide that she was right. And so it went on. Hammer time. Leo had managed to grab wealth from churches in Italy because the Byzantine Empire still held on to some territory there that they had taken during Justinian's day. But in 751, the Lombards conquered Ravenna, the Byzantine capital of Italy. They had already taken Rome, looting the city while Pope Gregory III looked on, powerless to stop them. But now they were dominant in all of Italy. For the Pope, this posed a problem. Should he side with the Lombards or with the Byzantines? In the end, he went for none of the above, and allied himself with the Franks under their leader, Charles Martel. Martel means the hammer. And as we've seen, he hammered the Arabs at Poitiers and drove them back into Spain. Charles is responsible for the invention, or the widespread implementation anyway, of two things that were to have a huge effect on European history. The first was the heavily armoured knight, and the second was stirrups, which meant that heavily armoured knights could actually stay on their horses. When Charles died, his son, Pepin the Short, was elected by his peers to be king. "How short was Pepin?" I hear you cry. And the answer is we don't know. The name may have nothing to do with his height. It may refer to the length of his hair, which he wore cut short in contrast to the long, flowing locks of his father. Anyway, in 754, Pope Stephen II travelled to Pepin's court, where he anointed the king and his two sons, Carloman and Charles, and declared Pepin king by the grace of God. Stephen gave the king the title of Patrician of the Romans. It has been hundreds of years since the last Roman emperor was seen in those parts, but you know, tradition and all that. In return for this endorsement, Pepin became the official defender of the papacy. He went south, defeated the Lombards, and gave the Pope a whole load of territory covering Ravenna, Perugia, and indeed Rome itself. These states, known as the Papal States, would continue as such for another 1,100 years. The Byzantine Emperor Constantine V, nicknamed Copronymus, sent Pepin an organ in 757, thus reintroducing the instrument to the Western world, where it had been happily absent since the fall of Rome. Copronymus means dung-named. He He was not, as perhaps you can tell, the most popular of emperors. Hardly surprising if you go around giving people organs. So he was an organ donor. Oh. Anyway, when Pepin died, his kingdom was divided between his two sons. But then Carloman, the eldest, died, so Charles became the sole ruler of the Franks. At Easter 774, he decided to visit Rome. From the start, he showed proper devotion. He is said to have ascended the steps of St. Peter on his knees. To the Pope, he was everything that you could wish for. A Christian king who showed proper respect for the papacy. It was as if all the Pope's Christmases had come at once, only at Easter. Charles went on to conquer the Saxons in Germany and to annex Bavaria, Hungary, and much of Austria. He failed to get Spain, but you can't win them all. I called him Charles so far on the logical grounds that was his name. But his exploits earned him the title Charles the Great, and his the Latin version of this, Carolus Magnus, that got transmuted through Old French into the best-known name of Charlemagne. And so, as the 8th century drew to a close, there was a proper empire in the West once more. It was almost like the good old days. What it needed, of course, was an emperor. And that was the end, chapter 4.